Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. So I hope you enjoyed the surgery, the video, which was an AAOS presentation. I'll just take you through the slides of AAOS of the same procedure. So the procedure's name is unilateral transforaminal posterior lumbar interbody fusion, or what we call as TLIF. We'll be dividing this talk into introduction, the advantages of TLIF, the preoperative assessment, the various surgical steps that we take, which we saw in the video, and the post-operative assessment and complications. So TLIF, or transforaminal interbody lumbar interbody fusion, is a technique of fusion in which we fuse the two bodies, vertebral bodies, one over the other by entering through the far lateral portion of the vertebral foramen. So basically what we are using a posterolateral approach to go into the interbody area by removing the facet joints. Like I said, that it's performed to join the the two spinal bones one over the other, or a spinal segment to be fused together. So first of all, the fusion part. Initially, the fusion was tried for the history of the fusion part is that Hydra in US tried for fusion in 1891 by using a posterior approach for a suspected dislocation in the vertebral thoracic vertebra. He wrapped the silver wire around the spinous process in a figure of 8 to stabilize the fracture. Dupont in France then carried out internal fixation of Pott's disease and described 5 Pott's diseases treated with the same Hydra wiring in 1895, and Hips in US in New York further developed the technique of Hips fusion, which became quite popular in terms of stripping the spinous process, decorticating it, fracturing it, and laying it over the continuous bones to form a continuous bony segment. Now, subsequently, TLIF and PLIF. PLIF is posterior lumbar interbody fusion, and TLIF is transforaminal lumbar interbody fusion. These came into practice to improve the fusion part, and the main indications for doing a TLIF procedure is adult deformity. So, in case suppose the spine is bent to one side, which is also known as degenerative scoliosis, or in degenerative diseases like degenerative spondylolisthesis, in which there is degenerative stenosis along with some degree of instability between the two vertebral bodies, or it's a ischemic spondylolisthesis. That means it's a clear-cut case of listhesis with a lysis over the vertebral body and the one vertebral body toppling over the other body, or in cases where we risk more of pseudoarthrosis if we don't do an interbody fusion, like in smokers, in a patient who has had a revision surgery, who has had some irradiated fusion bed, like a cancer patient post treatment, post radiotherapy, or a patient on chemotherapy or on systemic corticosteroids. So these patients have a very reduced chance of fusion, and hence by doing an interbody fusion, we drastically increase the chances of fusion. Advantages of a TLIF is that it's a single stage procedure, and we do not need to go through a transabdominal approach. Transabdominal becomes slightly difficult in going through either peritoneum or on the sides of the peritoneum, and then encountering the large vessels which are going just in front of the spine. If you're doing one side of the TLIF without needing to decompress the other side, then we also preserve the contralateral lamina in which we can add the bone grafts, so that we can achieve a 360-degree fusion. Because we are entering far laterally, much beyond the dura, so there's a much lower chance of a dural injury or a neurological injury. And by doing an anterior surgery, we actually find it difficult to go above L3 because there are great vessels there. But in cases of TLIF, we can actually go much up, because again, the great vessels are not there. And suppose we are going for a reoperation in which a patient has a failed surgery, then the surgery will be done posteriorly, so there will be a lot of scarring in the posterior part. But if we go through posterolateral part, that will be relatively free of scar, and we can actually go in through that posterolateral part, expose the dura there, decompress the root, and then fuse the dura also without chancing any injury. We need to first of all see the history of the present illness in terms of what is the duration of the symptoms, how did it start, what are the precipitating factors, how does it get relieved, and we can evaluate the intensity by using a visual analog score, and also the functional assessment by Oswestry Disability Index. We do laboratory investigations after examination, and certain standard imaging that we need to get are an MRI of the lumbosacral spine, static anteroposterior X-rays, and the dynamic flexion extension views. We may also need to get oblique views. So X-rays, we can determine the rotation of the vertebral bodies, what is the direction of the pedicles, how are the end plates, how thick is the disc space, and obviously the clinical examination. So the surgical procedure starts with the position of the patient, which is generally a prone position, or sometimes some surgeons may also prefer a knee chest position. Table is adjusted so that we can see a C-arm through AP and lateral views both. Any good C-arm can be used. And then we give a incision in the midline posteriorly, which is approximately 4 centimeters. We dissect and retract the subcutaneous tissue, come across the lumbosacral fascia, which we also cut over over both the sides of the spinous process. And then we put on our retractors. Now, they have used the quadrant retractors, which are by Medtronic, which are self-retaining nice retractors, but we can use any retractors to establish a working channel. So after the skin incision, then we come across the lower articular process, the upper articular process, and the lamina and the disc space. So what we'll be doing is we'll be removing the lower articular process, part of the upper articular process, part of the upper lamina, and the ligamentum flavum to expose the underlying dural sac and the underlying disc. So generally, we prefer to before doing the laminectomy part or the laminotomy part, we prefer to use to put in the pedicle screws, because then it becomes much easier, because we have ideal landmarks available. Sometimes some surgeons may prefer to do a laminectomy or a laminotomy first, and then they may be putting on the pedicle screws. So pedicle screws are generally put at the midline of the transverse process, just as the junction of the transverse process and the superior articular process. So we mark that area, we open the cortical bone by either a starter or a nibbler, and then we put a pedicle probe and we insert the pedicle in the direction as we see in the C-arm, or we decided it preoperatively by seeing the X-rays or the CT scans or the MRIs. The ideal insertion point is generally in the intersection of the transverse process and the junction of the upper and lower articular process, or the pars interarticularis. Which side do we do the TLF? It is generally determined by the side of the pathology. So if suppose the right-sided compression is much more and the facet joints and the bones are enlarged at that side, we will do the transforaminal from that side. If it is in the other side, we will prefer to do it from the other side. We resect, we initially start with resecting the ligamentum flavum. Ligamentum flavum can be excised by first of all cutting the lamina in the upper part of the ligamentum flavum or the lower part of the ligamentum flavum. So we remove the inferior lamina of the L5. If we are doing the L5S1 disc space TLF, we remove the inferior part of the lamina by a Crescens Rounger. As we keep on removing the inferior part of the lamina of L5, we come across a time when the ligamentum flavum is finished and we come across the dura. So from that point of time, we generally gently lift the ligamentum flavum above the dura to make sure that there are no additions between the dura and the ligamentum flavum, and we excise the dura till we go down. So this way we are able to see both the roots, the exiting root and the transmitting root. After that, we also resect the inferior articular process of the L5 vertebra just below the pedicle part, and we remove the whole of the articular process of the lower articular process of the L5 vertebra. Generally, we try to preserve the spinous process, because spinous process, one, provides stability by the interspinous and the supraspinous ligaments. They also provide us with a place of distraction in case we wish to distract, to put in the cage, and also they serve as a good container for the bone graft which is put on the other side. We also resect part of the superior articular process of S1 with the Crescens Rounger, so that we have a good space available, which is basically the dura, the transmitting roots, and the underlying disc space now. At this stage, what we can do is that we can distract the disc space by either attaching a rod onto the pedicle screws which have been applied and then distracting the rods as we saw in the video. And some surgeons might use the spinous process and just distract the two spinous process to make the space larger in the disc space. We start with the smallest dilator first. So we give an incision to the disc space. We remove the disc by using a pituitary disc forceps. Then we put a dilator which is initially 8 mm, and then we gradually keep on increasing the dilators. So that dilators are generally put in horizontally, and then we rotate it 90 degrees so that they distract the two disc spaces. After that, once this distraction is complete, we can actually see on the C-arm if we have achieved good distraction or not, and if not, we can sequentially keep on doing more distractions till we achieve what we wanted to achieve. So we use distractors, we use shavers, we use curettes to prepare the end plate and to remove the disc and whatever part of the cartilage or end plate that comes into the disc space by using the pituitary rongeurs, pituitary disc forceps. So discectomy is finally performed using curettes, osteotomes, rongeurs, and shavers. And we try to maintain the integrity of the end plates. We don't want to fracture the end plates because once the end plates get fractured, then the cage is likely to sink into the vertebral body. So we want to maintain the integrity of the end plates also. So once the disc has been removed from the central portion, we can visualize the end plates. We can also use the either the osteotome or the pituitary or the Carison's rongeur to remove the posterior lip, which is a projection of the vertebral body up and down, so that we can have a whole parallel surface of the vertebral body, which can make life much easier for inserting the cage. So once the posterior lip is resected, then it's a very smooth passage to insert the cage. It is important to have this parallel surface so that we do not fracture the vertebral body or part of the bone when we are inserting the cage inside. And we remove as thoroughly as possible all the disc that is present. So the disc which is right in front of the area through which we are going into the disc, and also the contralateral corner by using offset curettes and offset pituitaries. So we have offset pituitaries through which we can remove it from the other side also. Curette and rasp is used to scrape any remaining disc, the cartilage from the bony end plates. Straight and angled rongeurs are used for all these things. So we should have achieved a good thorough discectomy, a good thorough preparation of the end plates. The end plates should have been well prepared so that there's punctate bleeding from the end plates, and the end plates should not be fractured. Then we've taken the bone graft, and we use the bone graft to fill the disc spaces on the contralateral side and the anterior part and the anteriormost part of the disc space. With the help of either pituitary, or we also have bone graft inserters which we can put into the disc space, put the bone graft, and then tamp it inside. It is important to have great quantity of bone graft inside so that will help in fusion. After all this has been done, then we insert a trial cage to see if the proper size that we have selected is fine. So we just insert the trial cage into the vertebral body between the two vertebral bodies. Check it with the C-arm lateral view to see if it is well positioned, disc space is well maintained, the end plates are well in contact with the cage. And once we are satisfied with everything, then we remove this cage and we put in the cage that we need to insert the implant. So these cages are available in titanium also, and in PEEK also. Not Concord Bullet implants are basically by Depu, which are lordotic in nature, which are lordotic cage, but we can use other companies also. So the cages normally have a hole inside which can be filled with a lot of bone graft, and then we tamp it inside along the same path that the trial was put in. So we attach the cage into the cage inserter, align it well, and then we tamp it inside without excessive force. We should be very, very, very gentle in the sense that we do not want to just hammer it inside, because hammering it inside can actually break the vertebral body end plates and can lead to more disaster. So after the cage has been put, then we compress the rods together so that we can provide a good degree of lordosis to the patient. Now the rods and the screw system can be any of the good screw systems. Expedium is again Depu Synthes system, but other systems can also be used. We tighten one of the screws, then put the compression, and we tighten the cranial and the caudal set of the screws after the compression, and then we remove the compressor. So final tightening is done through the final tightener, and then we check it on the C-arm to see if all the screws are good, the cage is good, the rod is not pressing upon any of the facets, and the view is looking fine. So ideally, the cage should be inside the vertebral body, slightly more anterior to the posterior end plate or the posterior part of the vertebral body, and it should almost be somewhere in the middle of the vertebral body on the AP view, because we have inserted it obliquely through the far lateral into the central part of the disc. Patient can be mobilized the next day, and generally patient is good enough to be discharged in 2 to 4 days after surgery, and patient is generally much relieved of pain and is able to join the office sometimes 2-3 weeks, and sometimes 4 to 6 weeks after his surgery, depending on his nature of the job. So in this surgery, what we have done is actually we have taken the bone graft, we have put it inside the disc space to try to fuse the two bones together. We have also put the bone graft after the surgery between the two transverse processes on both the sides and also the remaining lamina, so that we are able to achieve a 360-degree fusion. Fusion will prevent a recurrence of the stenosis that was there before. Obviously, there's a lot of pain after surgery, so we can use many types of pain management therapies, including mild opioids to NSAIDs. We take certain precautions, advise patients not to bend anywhere that it will be difficult for them to bend after such a surgery. No twisting allowed. Driving is allowed after they feel comfortable, because initially the patient is under so much of analgesia that sometimes he may be drowsy and he may actually end up with a problem. So once the patient is off much of the medications, patient can start driving. That is not a problem. Obviously, it's a major procedure, so we can have complications, but TLIF is good in sense that because it is a far lateral approach, so the chances of a neural injury are much reduced, because we don't need to really retract the dura mater much. So the instances of dural tear are much less. Initially, historically, the dural tears were almost 18%, but nowadays hardly 1 to 5% of dural tears are encountered during the surgery. Occasionally, an implant may also migrate, so cage may actually come back when the patient is mobilized, but that will generally occur if we have not really compressed the two bones together. If we have compressed it well, inserted the cage well, then ideally it should not occur. But then again, the instances are such instances are seen. Pedicle screw malposition is another problem which can occur. Infection obviously is a part of complication of any spine surgery, and hematoma can be there, which may sometimes we may need to go in again and drain the hematoma. There are certain other alternatives to a TLIF. TLIF is a surgical procedure basically to reduce the back pain and the leg pain. So patients can be started on pain medications also to improve the pains for some times. Then there are root injections, various physical therapies like physiotherapy can be done, and activity modification can be done. There are various surgical approaches which can relieve the pains. For example, microdiscectomy, a full-fledged laminectomy can be done. We can do a laminectomy with just the bone grafting into the intertransverse area without a screw usage, or we can do a screw usage with simple posterolateral fusion in those cases where there is not much of an instability. Posterior interbody fusion is also a technique which is almost like transforaminal interbody technique, except for the fact that here we don't remove much of the facets. So we have to retract the dural sheath to quite an extent. Hence, there's a slightly more incidence of neuropraxia or a durotomy in this case. Anterior lumbar interbody fusion is a technique in which we go through the anterior part, so left side of the abdomen, we go in, we retract the peritoneum, we come across the great vessels which are supplying the leg and the anterior part of the vertebral body. We go between those vessels as they're dividing, and then we resect the disc, and we provide a cage inside. And we also sometimes then need to turn the patient over and put in the screws posteriorly to stabilize it. Artificial disc replacement is another surgery in which there is a disc-related pain, in which we remove the disc and we put in artificial disc. It's a whole artificial disc which is put inside the lumbar disc, and sometimes we can just put a nucleus pulposus inside. Nucleoplasty is another technique in which we generally put in a needle and we try to evaporate or burn the nucleus pulposus to indirectly decompress the disc prolapse. And then the spinal cord stimulation is a technique in which we again put in some spinal cord stimulators over the spine in those cases which are a failure, in which patients are not just improving with any kind of a surgery. So this is the last approach that someone can have to treat these patients. So thank you very much.